Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Another twist in the tale of the Mercedes versus Hamilton drama which has emerged big time over the last couple of months. Ever since Hamilton confirmed that he was joining Ferrari back in February, rumours have emerged as to exactly what's happened behind the scenes between Toto and Hamilton to get them to this point where it doesn't necessarily seem like team and driver that have had so much success together are really seeing eye to eye. Toto today gives more details and information on the topic, shedding light on his position that he did not give Hamilton the contract that he necessarily wanted at Mercedes because he was concerned about a decline of his cognitive sharpness, effectively indicating that Toto either predicted or believes that Hamilton is washed up and not the driver that he used to be, and therefore Toto was eyeing up the next generation. Has this indicated to some degree to Hamilton the decisions that he needs to make in his career? Is Toto correct on this one, or is it really not a thing you might want to say about a partnership which has been the most successful ever in the history of Formula 1? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. So much happened in Formula 1 today, starting with the following. Now, we've known this was coming for some time, but it's still unfortunate to hear it confirmed, I think, and Domenicali hasn't said it officially yet, but he does say the following. We have some news to share very, very soon with regard to the possibility in the midterm to have some rotational European Grand Prix and some other new options coming later. So basically, they can't move that far beyond 24 Grand Prix. 24, 25 probably is, I wouldn't say the theoretical limit. I'm sure the FIA or the Formula 1 management, sorry, not the FIA, although they might not be too mad about it either, they will push for more Grand Prix because more Grand Prix tends to mean more money. Can they go far beyond 25? That would be a challenge. We currently have 24 this season. So the plan would be to keep some people happy is to say, hey, we won't do Spa every year, one of the greatest tracks in the history of motorsport, but they can't quite pay us enough money and it's, a little bit out of the way for some of the fans to get to. So maybe we'll run that every other year. And then was obviously they did this, the German Grand Prix, Hockenheim, Nürburgring, stuff like this. These rotational Grand Prix have happened, but it's still difficult to think about the possibility of the European Grand Prix circuit as in the best tracks on the calendar, pretty much, right? These tracks and, legendary historic racing circuits getting effectively intermingled between each other because there's more money coming in elsewhere. This Madrid Grand Prix in a car park. Okay, maybe not a car park, but you know what I'm saying? It's like an industrial complex they're running this Madrid Grand Prix in. Not exactly a legendary track like an Imola or a Spa or even a Silverstone has been thrown in this conversation as to whether it has the Grand Prix every year. I don't think Silverstone's going anywhere, but you know what I'm saying about some of these tracks that might be considered. So, and then, there's money coming in from Korea, maybe. There's talks about South Africa getting back on the calendar with Kyalami, and there's talks that Saudi want 2 Grand Prix. They want Jeddah and then Qadiyah, which is coming up in a couple of years' time when that city is built. So this is what Formula 1 have to contend with, and unfortunately it's going to mean that some of these tracks, we don't see them every year, which I think would be a real shame. Williams are struggling because they've crashed a lot, and even with Colapinto doing a better job than Sargent, he still had a couple of moments. Obviously Brazil was, well, kind of a nightmare for everyone, but especially Colapinto didn't have a great time. Did his car completely aquaplane away from him when he crashed and caused the red flag in the race? Yes, but still wasn't ideal, and as Val says, 5 major crashes in 2 weekends, we just can't have it happen, and of course Albon's car was totally totaled as well. So the problem is for Williams that they just don't have any money to fix these cars, and the issue is they may just have to revert to older specs. That's where they currently stand. I think it's very unlikely that both Albon and Colapinto can run the newer spec version from now to the end of the season. Albon, as the lead driver, will likely get the benefit of the doubt, and that might be interesting for Colapinto because it's doubtful, I think, they'll be able to fix these cars, have the money to fix these cars. They might just have to slap on older upgrades or older versions of the car. And that does hurt a guy like Colapinto who's trying to score points to prove that he's either better than or equal to Albon so he can get a drive elsewhere. That may be unlikely. But as we know, Colapinto is definitely having interest from other potential candidate teams. These are potentially your rookies on the grid for next season. Bortoleso's coming into Sauber, Antonelli's coming into Mercedes. Behrman technically won't be a rookie by the FIA standards because he's driven 3 Grand Prix now. He drove in Saudi, in Baku, and then this past weekend in Brazil. And technically after 3 races, you're no longer a rookie, but I think everyone's going to consider it to be at least his rookie year, right, technically. Jack Doohan, we think, is coming in for Alpine, although that might not be guaranteed. Lawson might get the Red Bull drive. Colapinto might get the RB drive. That's where we currently find ourselves. But this was the rumour. We did mention this yesterday, but there's been further rumours now emerging that maybe Flavio Briatore, effectively, and Alpine have changed their mind, and they've now said, you know what, yes, Jack Doohan is a prospect, but he's not proven anything in Formula 1. He hasn't got the chance to. Colapinto has, and therefore they might want him instead. But that would involve some serious money going into Williams' pocket, which, might help out with their trying to budget, basically, for some of their crash repairs that they need to do. Sergio Perez continues to make things kind of challenging for himself. I thought this quote was quite fascinating. There was quite a lot of talk about it, actually, because he said the following, of course: Max won the race, and they had pace in Max's car and in the Red Bull seemingly in general, but Perez wasn't able to deliver on that. And he said the following: there are some positives from the weekends. Max's victory is important. Momentum-wise, it has been a very strong weekend in terms of pace. There are plenty of positives from that. I think one of the strongest weekends in terms of pace. We put the car on track, and we were very competitive in FP1. Much more competitive weekends. So it's just a strange thing for a driver who is costing his team in the Constructors' Championship to say, after scoring no points in a race where his teammate went from 17th to 1st, and saying, well, this weekend we had more pace than we did before. So, good job, guys, right? It's like, how does Max go from 17th to 1st and Checo goes from 13th or 12th to 11th or whatever it was over the course of a Grand Prix in what seemingly was the fastest car on the track? There was also this race as an interesting question before we talk about the Hamilton drama. I thought was, something to at least contemplate, because people are saying now the drivers is basically over. And okay, McLaren haven't admitted that, and it's not technically over until after Las Vegas, but it likely will be at that point. We'll see. Max needs a 60-point lead over the last 2 rounds in order to guarantee it, because there's a sprint in Qatar, and basically it's done. So, but the drivers, or the constructors, is still on. So I think it's an interesting one for Piastri, because, look, there's not been many occasions in the last few rounds where Piastri has had to yield to Lando to allow him to have a better chance in the drivers. They have done that, most notably in Brazil, but there's been plenty of other occasions where that hasn't happened. So, of course, with the drivers basically being over now, Piastri might want to make a claim in the last few rounds as to where he's going to be. Does he have the ability to do that? Sure. Does he have the consistent overall pace over a single lap and a race stint? I'm not so sure that he does compared to Lando, but that's a question that he will try and answer over the last couple of rounds. But let's talk about some of this Hamilton-Mercedes drama, because I thought the statements today from Toto actually make a lot of sense with what we have seen happen at Mercedes and that relationship behind the scenes over the last few months. Ever since he left to Ferrari or confirmed that he was leaving, things have felt somewhat strange, and some of the decisions that have been made and the comments that have been made publicly are all, kind of weird to me, at least on some level, given the fact that Mercedes and Hamilton, incredibly successful partnership in Formula 1, most Grand Prix ever, basically longest driver with a certain team, all these things have done together, and it seems like this divorce has been somewhat messy, maybe behind the scenes. Certainly Toto Wolff implies, and maybe what Toto says is fair, but the fact that he says it in the way that he does now, I think raises some questions, because Sainz was involved maybe in Mercedes' thought process, but I thought it was very interesting that Toto Wolff basically says Sainz was not on the conversation, as were a couple of other options that we'll get to in a second. But Hamilton's still trying. I mean, he says, I've not lost faith in the team. I'm just leaving for myself, wanting to go to Ferrari. And apparently he's going to dedicate this week in the factory to try and understand how he can better get to grips with the current problems that the W15 is giving him. They were using slightly different specs, I believe, this weekend. It was reported that they were using slightly different versions of the car, Hamilton and Russell, but, Russell wasn't rapid, really, but he was reasonably quick, and quick enough to lead a Grand Prix after Lando Norris bottled it again off the line. So, look, Hamilton's still trying. He's not given up on his season, and maybe some of this work will even help Mercedes in the future. But of course, his focus now is going to be over on Ferrari. Now, Toto Wolff said a lot of things today, one of which was very fascinating, was what's happened from the Sainz camp. So, of course, Carlos Sainz and his team found out he wasn't getting renewed and Hamilton was coming in instead, presumably, a couple of weeks before it was actually officially confirmed. So Toto said that he found out about the move from old man Sainz Sr, who called Toto up and said, hey, this is what's happening. Lewis is going to Ferrari and he's replacing my boy, basically. And that's what he said. I sent a text to Fred Vasseur saying, you're taking our driver, and I got no response. Very unusual for Fred. So I think at that point, Toto had probably put 2 and 2 together. the interesting thing is, of course, this never publicly came out until the morning of the announcement, pretty much. So, despite the fact that the players behind the scenes had kind of heard that this was happening, it is interesting the Sainz camp did this, or at least like Sainz Sr, because the point is, hey Toto, Hamilton's taken, my seat of my son, you should sign Carlos instead, or you should sign Sainz. I guess, why else would you leak it to Toto other than to prepare him to all right, let's get this deal done, makes sense. But of course, Toto didn't feel like it made sense, Mercedes didn't feel like it made sense, and I thought it was kind of funny that on some level the Sainz camp initiated this, and yet when Toto was asked the question on who he was considering, he didn't even mention Sainz. He says, because Hamilton announced this when he did, and didn't, let's say, announce it earlier or later or whatever, and it's, it's business at the end of the day, and Hamilton announced it when he needed to announce it, given the circumstances, and he could have let it drag on. Technically, Lewis could have let it drag on, but he announced it early enough, and before the season even begun, and Toto then says, didn't give me much time to react, and I possibly missed out on negotiating with other drivers who had just signed contracts a few weeks earlier, like Leclerc with Ferrari and Lando with McLaren. It's pretty funny, right, that, maybe Sainz initiated this, or the Sainz camp initiated this. Now, to be fair to them, it doesn't seem like they leaked it to the press publicly. I mean, we only heard on the morning of, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I don't know. But it's interesting that Toto was told by Sainz Sr, like, hey, Sainz is available, Hamilton's going to Ferrari, a couple of weeks before Hamilton told him in person, when Fred Vasseur obviously wasn't going to give a response, and then Toto was like, well, Sainz wasn't really one of the guys we wanted Leclerc or Norris, but, that wasn't going to be possible. However, now I don't really know where this crying wolf has come from, but let's have a look at some of these quotes, because Toto kind of indicates why this happened from his POV and exactly what he would, why he allows this to happen, I think is the key point. Because Mercedes, we know, could have given Hamilton a 2+1 when he wanted it. Mercedes said no 2+1, no ambassadorial contract. Ferrari said, Fred Vasseur said, hey, 2+1 ambassadorial contract, we'll do whatever you want, and we'll give you a car which is likely to be more competitive than the Mercedes in 2026, certainly 2025. No-brainer for Hamilton to take that opportunity, and the opportunity to win with Ferrari. Obviously, it makes so much sense. The point being, though, from the Mercedes side, they have allowed this to happen, right? And this is what Toto says. I had it on my radar that Lewis would go. I couldn't understand, though, why he would change to another team before we knew if we were going to be competitive, I guess, for the new season. But, look, Hamilton had seen the writing on the wall, was maybe not so impressed at Mercedes' project, and sure, he was able to win a couple of races with them this year in that W15, which still seems to be more of a diva now than maybe it even was at the start of the season. It also didn't give me time to react. I possibly missed out on negotiating with other drivers. We just mentioned that. Do I take it personally? No, just a business decision. We've enjoyed a very successful journey together. Now we have our own objectives. It didn't even move the needle for me. I'm thick skins. I've had tough moments. This doesn't compare, he says. So, okay, fair enough. But look, we know that he, on some level, by negotiating in the way that he did with Hamilton earlier on, have allowed this possibility to occur. And to be fair, this was, if you read between the lines, you would have seen this a long time ago. And I feel like all of us have kind of known it, but he's made it quite evident now. So then Toto says something very interesting about the fact that he must feel, or look, it's inevitable that drivers can't keep up their level forever. Is Hamilton today the driver that he was in, let's say, 2018, 2019? I think he can get there on certain weekends. I don't think he's consistent as he was back then. Like, has he still got the same, is he still the same driver under the helmet than he was in his absolute prime? I think yes. Maybe just consistency of execution and qualifying, and also just the nature of these cars don't fit as well with his driving style as they did pre-2022. And we know that on a weekend where Hamilton has a car that can win, he's absolutely capable of still winning, right? Like, there's no doubt about that. And I still think Hamilton could do it at a very good level, and if you give him the car, I still think he's the driver on the grid that is most likely to take the challenge right now to Max Verstappen. But, Hamilton, when he's 60, isn't going to be the same, right? So, obviously, presumably, maybe Alonso will be, I don't know, but presumably, at some point, there is obviously a decline. It may not happen depending on nutrition, how well you train, and these other things. And it's not like Hamilton's reaction time has gone down. He had the fastest reaction time on the starts on the grid this entire season. But Toto says him leaving for Ferrari helped us avoid the moment where we need to tell the sport's most iconic driver that we want to stop the partnership. Mercedes effectively implying that they were ready to tell Hamilton, you know what, we've had our time, you're not as good as you were before, we're going to let you go. And that's what Toto says. I had it on my radar that Lewis was going to go. We obviously mentioned these other quotes earlier, and then he said the following: there's a reason why we only signed a 1+1 year contract. We're in a sport where cognitive sharpness is extremely important, and I believe that everyone has a shelf life. So, you know, like, look, I don't think Toto, his reasoning is like understandable, but it's just like the way that he says it about Hamilton is obviously going to rile people up, right? Because he basically is implying here that, you know, Hamilton's washed up, he's not the guy that he used to be, and he's got a shelf life, right? And it's not even implying that he is, it's implying that they predicted that he would be, and obviously you don't know how much of that is even true because Hamilton's leaving, the team has been basically building around Russell recently, he gets the preferential treatment in many respects, but I also get it from Toto's POV. They wanted to make sure they didn't lose Antonelli. They feel like Antonelli's the next Verstappen, next Hamilton, whatever you want to say, and as he says, everyone's got a shelf life. I need to look at the next generation. Even Toto said before that he studied, you know, Manchester United under Sir Alex Ferguson, the way that he was able to constantly reinvigorate the team over many years, and saying they anticipated it in the performance of their top stars and brought in junior players that drove the team for the next few years. But I think this type of statement raises questions because, like, say what you want on Hamilton, his ability is where he used to be, where he is today, these other questions, and whether he can still do it with Ferrari, which I think, you know, most are confident that he potentially still could. This question on cognitive sharpness, I think, is, you know, potentially kind of ironic because many might argue, does Toto need to look in the mirror a little bit here, right? Like, his team has declined massively over the last few years, and it's not just Hamilton that's not winning every race like he used to be a few years ago. The car is terrible compared to where it used to be. They've not made substantial progress in the last 3 years compared to where they're trying to be in the Grand Effect era. Is it Toto who needs to look in the mirror and say, hang on a second here, like, you know, maybe I'm the problem, or at least I'm potentially part of the issue with the team? And I know that Toto asked himself these questions, but it's like if you're going to talk about cognitive sharpness being a problem for one of your drivers, then you might have to question why your organisation was able to win for 8 years in a row, and for the last few years has not done anything anywhere close to that kind of potential, and has now become effectively a midfield team over the last few years with drivers that don't understand the car and often are putting it in the wall because the car is simply dangerous because it can't take a corner properly over the curbs, as was the case in Mexico and the US Grand Prix. So it's not just, you know, Toto's fault why these things have happened, but I think it's just a fascinating insight that Toto's like, yeah, well, maybe Hamilton's not the guy that he used to be. Maybe Toto could think the same about his own position. I'm sure that he does on some level. But it's not like Toto's magical idea here that, oh, you look at the next generation reinvigorating the team like Sir Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United. Like, you know, Mercedes haven't managed to achieve that. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below here, because I think some of these statements and insights from the Mercedes perspective you could have seen coming. And, you know, I understand where Toto's coming from. I also wouldn't have wanted to lose out on a talent like Antonelli. And I totally get the idea of giving Hamilton a 1+1 with the option to, you know, ask Hamilton to leave. I mean, the 1+1 had options on both sides. Hamilton could choose to leave and go to Ferrari, which he did, but Mercedes could also choose to not renew him. And maybe Toto, in the meeting where Hamilton told him he was leaving, was, you know, kind of relieved to say, all right, well, maybe I was going to tell Hamilton he was going and he was fired. We weren't going to extend the contract, which would have been crazy on some level, but maybe Toto was thinking that was the way to do it. Of course, the reality is there are bigger problems at Mercedes than, you know, Lewis Hamilton's dip in form that we've seen recently, but I think, you know, most would be confident that give him a car that's capable of doing it, the potential is still most certainly there. Over an entire championship season, that's a challenge, but especially such a long season that we presently have. But let's be honest, the Ferrari seem like a more functional team than Mercedes do right now. Good friends Toto and Fred in charge of those two respective teams, but different results over the last couple of rounds. But very much interested to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.